Welcome to Creativity and Climate Solutions, featuring Dr. Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse, and Dr. Jyotika Vermani.
This program is brought to you by Creative Pinellas. Our mission is to facilitate a vibrant, integrative, collaborative, and sustainable Pinellas County arts community and arts and cultural destination. Creative Pinellas is funded in part by the Pinellas County Board of County Commissioners, Visit St. Pete Clearwater, and the State of Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs.
And special thanks to the Volo Foundation.
Hi, my name is Danny Olda. I'm the Curatorial Manager for Creative Pinellas. Thank you for joining us for this special conversation between the Creative Pinellas 2020 Artist Laureate, Dr. Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse, and the Director of the Schmidt Ocean Institute, Dr. Jyotika Vermani. First, we'd like to thank the Volo Foundation for helping make this video and conversation possible, and we're excited and proud to be a part of Florida Climate Week this year. This conversation coincides with the current exhibition here at the Gallery at Creative Pinellas that you can see in part behind me, called Expanding Waters by Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse, and it's open through June 13th. As the exhibition itself explores themes of climate change and global warming, sea level rise, we continue to explore these themes with additional programming, but with additional artists and experts in various fields. If you enjoyed this conversation today, please feel free to visit us at facebook.com/creativepinellas, where you can see other videos, including more Artist Laureate conversations. And now I'd like to introduce our 2020 Artist Laureate and hosts of this event, Creativity and Climate Solutions, Dr. Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Carol Mickett, and I shall be your host for this hour, along with my fellow 2020 Creative Pinellas Art Laureate, Robert Stackhouse. Robert and I are art collaborators. Our work focuses on water and all those objects and events that impact our waters and us. Our current exhibition, Expanding Waters, is up until June 13th, 2021 at the Creative Pinellas Galleries in Largo, Florida. We certainly hope you'll visit either in person or online at creativepinellas.org. Our exhibition, Expanding Waters, focuses on climate change, our warming waters, and the ways to bring our world back into balance. Art is a great way to create a story and engage people in conversation. Those of us who live in Florida, especially near the coast, are well aware of high tides, the intense hurricanes, the increase of our water's temperature, and much more. As responsible citizens, who I believe all of us are, we must do our part in addressing these real happenings that are threatening our world. The conversations that Robert and I can provide through our art can go just so far. This is why we have invited many others to contribute to the exhibition: theater people, dancers, writers, journalists, and scientists. Scientists are especially important in discussions about our global waters. They can explore these issues in depth. So for us to learn the causes, the ongoing facts, and the details of solutions, we must turn to the scientists who spend their lives researching, experimenting, and ruminating in scientific creativity. This afternoon, thanks to the Volo Foundation, Robert and I have with us the perfect person to talk about the world's waters, Dr. Jyotika Vermani. Dr. Vermani is the Executive Director of the Schmidt Ocean Institute. The Schmidt Ocean Institute is a 501c3 private nonprofit operating foundation established to advance oceanographic research, discovery, and knowledge, and to catalyze sharing of the information about the oceans. More on this institute in a moment. Prior to joining the Schmidt Institute, Jyotika was the executive director of Planet and Environment at X Prize and the Rainforest X Prize, a competition for innovations in biodiversity assessment technology. She was also the executive director of the Shell Ocean Discovery X Prize to spur innovation of unmanned and autonomous deep sea technologies that are focused on the mapping of the seafloor by 2030. This is really impressive stuff. I first met Dr. Vermani in late 2012 when I invited her to be my guest for my program Our Town at the Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. Here we are sitting on the stage, ready to begin. She had recently finished her PhD in physical oceanography at the College of Marine Science at the University of South Florida and was recently married. She was the associate director of the Florida Institute of Oceanography and a much followed hurricane blogger. So here she is sitting in the seat of the hurricane hunter, which drives into hurricane to assess their strength and longevity. Here she's in charge of Florida. And finally, she is manifesting storm in her mighty strength. What I admire most about Dr. Vermani, as you will soon see, is that she is not only brilliant, she is generous with her knowledge, optimistic about the world, and perhaps most important, joyful and fun. So we welcome Dr. Jyotika Vermani.
Thank you, Carol and Bob. That was what an amazing introduction. I'm so delighted to be here with you to talk about all things oceans.
So why don't we start by you telling us more about the Schmidt Ocean Institute, of which you are the executive director.
Yeah, the Schmidt Ocean Institute was established in 2009 by Eric and Wendy Schmidt. So Eric Schmidt's the former CEO of Google. And we are a nonprofit, as you mentioned, and we operate a research vessel, which you see actually above me, that I'm flying over here, called the RV Falco. And Falco is named after the luck dragon in Neverending Story, by the way. So we operate this vessel and we offer it at no cost to scientists and those who develop marine technologies around the world. And in exchange, we ask that they make their findings and data publicly available as quickly as possible, because we believe that the faster the data becomes available, the faster the speed of making connections and increasing our understanding occurs. And then that means the faster we can react to and manage this amazing environment that is our planet.
So how much water, oceans, gulfs, bays, etc., make up our world?
Most, a lot, actually. So the oceans cover about 71% of our planet. So that's not including, the rivers, but the bulk of our water is, of course, in the ocean environment. So yeah, over 2/3 of our planet is water. It's consists of water on the surface.
Well, that's really interesting because we don't, as normal people, I mean, not like you and your scientists, prioritize water. We prioritize the land and places where we live, where 70% is a lot. And you would think that we would know way more about oceans and big bodies of water than we do. So why don't we?
And that's a very good question. By the way, I'm a normal person too.
Yes,
just wanted to make that
clear.
So there's actually two parts to that, I think, anyway. First of all, we do prioritize water because we need clean water for, survival. But water is part of our atmospheric, the air that we breathe. Water vapor is a part of that. So, having having air to breathe is also a high priority on most people's lists. But I think the issue that you're driving at, which is why don't we know more about the oceans, is because it's not easy to see through water like that. And so although we have, better knowledge of and maps of Moon and Mars, we really still can't get through our own opaque barrier that is this ocean. And it's also a rough environment to work on and work in. It's not terra firma, it's always moving, it's salt water, which is, corrosive. Once you get underwater, the pressures increase quite rapidly. So
and you can't breathe.
And you can't, you can't breathe. So for every 10 meters that you go down, it's another 1 atmosphere of pressure. So it gets, quite intense quite quickly and dark. It's dark. So there's a whole host of reasons why it's difficult to find out what's going on under that surface.
So sort of what you're saying is that the exploration underwater and our seafloor is comparable to the complexity of the space exploration, except we can't see it as well.
It's very much comparable.
We don't have the super telescopes to just sort of glance down and take a picture of the bottom of the ocean, right? You have to go there to do that. So I can see where it's a very challenging thing to do.
It's interesting you make that analogy with space. I view it as 2 ends of a spectrum. So space, there is no pressure. Underwater at the bottom of the ocean, it's very high pressure. We as humans need technology to get to experience both of those. We can't breathe in either of those. So it needs human and ingenuity to really get into both of those environments. So, and maybe there's aliens out there as well, but there's certainly aliens underwater.
So you have a video that you could show us that introduces us more to the Schmidt Ocean Institute.
Yeah, so I actually I joined the Schmidt Ocean Institute last year at the end of 2020, at the end of February of 2020, I should say. But this video is essentially the year I have been there with this organization, and it captures our travels. We were around Australia for the year, and part of that was because of the pandemic, and we were in a good place, and we were one of the, if not the only, research vessel that continued to operate last year, because for a period of time, if everyone remembers, things shut down and it was really difficult, and we had to go through it very carefully. But it was worth it. There was some amazing findings. So actually, if we want to play the video, and then we can talk about that after.
That is so cool.
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. So some of the things you saw in that video was the 45-meter long siphonophore, which is now known to be the longest sea creature in the world that's ever been seen, all the way down to like a 1 centimeter pygmy seahorse, which to find that, by the way, is like you driving on a road and seeing a safety pin on the sidewalk. That's what that's like, because the equipment that was used is about as big as a car. And it's an underwater robot that can go down to 4,500 meters depth. And we offer this at no cost to scientists as well, this ability. And it's got high K, 4K camera system on board and videos. So it was really an amazing year last year for discovery.
So seeing those, the diversity of the size of those and the looks of those critters that live in that world, especially the diversity of size, it makes you kind of wonder why we always see extraterrestrials in our encounters as being human scale. Whereas down there, I mean, human scale is just kind of arbitrary, isn't it? I mean, did you show us anything that sort of related to a human scale that was very much smaller or very much larger, it's really interesting. It's just our conceit as human beings that everything is made after us. So I think being down there, it must give everybody a different take on what humanity is and what life is, what life can be. When you say, well, this planet is uninhabitable, yet, well, how many miles down do you go? Is it inhabitable? Well, no, but yes, it is. So, those microbes they found under the Arctic ice or the Antarctic, whatever it is. It wasn't supposed to be there.
Right.
I think that's fascinating that you can do that.
That's a really great observation. And we haven't yet discovered all life out there. There's, the oceans are 95% of what we call our habitable space on this planet. But we haven't even really started digging under rocks. So what's beneath even the sea floor is still like completely unknown. So we've got a long way to go yet to find out all the aliens.
In the video, we saw research done in Australia, and I understood from you that was done because they had the best COVID statistics, namely not so much COVID as the rest of the world. Now, the oceans are all connected. So what happens in Australia in those waters, do they in any way affect what happens in our waters here in Florida?
Yeah, you would, maybe people would be surprised, but the oceans are all connected. There is what's called the global conveyor belt, which is this system of currents that circulate the world's oceans. They are deep water currents as well as shallow water currents. Kind of, like in a conveyor belt around the world's oceans. So through that, yes, all the oceans are connected. Now, of course, it's not so easy to say Florida and Australia are connected directly because it's such a vast distance that anything has to travel. It takes a parcel of water, something like 1,000 years to travel around this conveyor belt, and a lot can happen in that time. But yeah, so in that sense, they're connected. I think perhaps a more direct connection is also through the atmosphere as well. So and what's happening above ocean level. But
just a point of interest. Excuse me. The painting that's behind Carol is about the Gulf of Mexico, but you can see those darker blue lines. Those are the currents of the world. The thicker ones are surface, and the thinner ones are the deep ones. And it shows the connectivity of everything. So we see that. We didn't know about how long it takes, but we did see that.
So it's another example how art can help make the invisible visible. and how it can show and start these conversations. Now, you do have artists on your research vessels.
We do, actually. We actually have an Artist at Sea program where we invite artists to come on board. Hint, hint. Oh, great. Look, I think we've got a match. And they are at sea alongside the scientists who are doing various different topics of research. So they get a chance to really intermingle with the science expedition that's going on, learn about the science and depict it in whichever form they wish. And I know there's a photo of a collage of the different types of art that maybe we can show. It's in the PowerPoint deck, but anything and everything from sculpture to painting to, we actually have a soundscape exhibit that's opening in Venice later this year, which was done by a indigenous artist from Australia, Papua New Guinea. So that's just an example. And we actually offer this art again in the same principle of open sharing of information. These exhibits at no cost to anywhere that would like to have them. So we have over 130 pieces now, I think.
So I want to talk about this idea of there's water all over the globe and it's all connected. And it's always been a question for me about why we name them different bodies of water. Why isn't it just one big body of water that has different parts? I mean, we talk about Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, this sea, blah. Why do we distinguish that?
Yeah, where does one start and the other begin?
Like in Florida, Florida's surrounded by water. And we have the Atlantic Ocean, we have the Gulf, we have the Caribbean Sea, we have the Gulf Stream, we have, much more than that. Tampa Bay.
So first of all, we call it one ocean. It is the ocean. So that is actually it's an interesting shift, because when I was a graduate student, it was oceans, plural. And so over the last, 15, 20 years, that has now shifted to the recognition that it is one ocean and it is all connected.
Well, you can't call the air above us different airs.
Exactly, right? There's one atmosphere, there's one ocean. You're absolutely right.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the reason it's divided in that sense is for geographical orientation, for knowing a map of this happened in the Atlantic Ocean, where this happened in the Pacific Ocean, this happened in the Indian Ocean. So geographically, for just our orientation purposes, but within the ocean, we have water masses, and those are actually scientifically divided by their core temperature and salinity. So there are the dense, the dense currents, the deeper currents we're talking about. Those have a higher salinity and a higher density, so that's why they sink, versus the shallower currents, which are warmer in temperature and less saline, they rise to the surface. So water masses are divided scientifically by those two metrics.
So the Gulf Stream is not as dense as
the Gulf Stream is right.
Yeah, it's on the surface, more on the surface, but its service is so much. I mean, it's such an important.
It is one of the major currents systems in the world. It's called a Western Boundary Current, but yes, it's one of the big ones.
So with respect to hurricanes, I mean, we know that when we're in Florida, we look to Africa for them coming off, if they're not originating in the Gulf, let's say. And then they go through different bodies of water. And when we do we think about what's in the Atlantic Ocean and what's in the Pacific, where's the El Nino and all of this. So how do hurricanes react to these different waters?
So hurricanes, because they're actually an ocean atmosphere phenomenon. So it's not just about the ocean, it's about the atmosphere and what's going on there as well. But really, they get their energy in a way from the ocean. So they need warm water, whether that's in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, or the Gulf, right? The Gulf Stream, which, by the way, of course, includes the Florida current and the loop current in the Gulf.
Right.
But that is actually a deep, warm body of water. So it's at the surface, but the temperature is deeper. It is warmer, deeper than when you're not in the Gulf Stream. So if a storm crosses the loop, any of that current system, the loop current, the Gulf Stream, the Florida current, it usually intensifies because as it's churning up water underneath, it actually is bringing up more warm water versus outside where it's churning up water, but it might be cooler. So that's how it really interacts. It's that water vapor and the heat energy that feeds it.
So with climate change and the warming of the waters, has the Gulf Stream gotten hotter?
That's a good question, and I don't know. I wouldn't like to say for sure the answer to that. I haven't really been following it. But actually, because the atmosphere counteracts what's going on, right? So as the climate's got warmer, as temperatures have increased in the atmosphere, by physics alone, it means that the atmosphere can now hold about, for every 1 degree warming, it can hold 7% more water vapor. And that's where you have your impact on storms, because if you have dry air, then they don't really grow. But if you have warm air and moist air, then they have that, additional room to grow. So that's really, I think, where the warming of the world kicks in for storms. And, you can, in Florida, you can see that when there's dry, dusty air coming off the Saharan desert, it inhibits storm formation versus when there isn't that.
So with the research that is done on your research vessel, and they're, of course, one of the things they're trying to do is map the ocean floor and discover all of the different things, like a new reef off of Australia, which is like incredible. Have they noticed differences because of climate change? Has there been an impact way down towards the ocean floor?
I think that's still a big scientific research question, because we do not have enough information in the first place. So it's really hard to assess change without a baseline. And, that was part of the problem with, for example, the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. There was no really good baseline information, and it's really hard to say this is what's changing without that. So I think as we get more of this technology down there and more eyes and are able to cover more of the globe, we'll at least start to see what's there now, and then we can start to monitor the longer term changes.
So have you mapped or anyone mapped the waters around the ocean floor around Florida?
Some mapping has been done. So around Florida, it depends what you call a map. If you go to Google, you'll see a map of the oceans and you'll think it's been mapped. But that is at about a 1 kilometer resolution. And that's derived from satellites. And what that means is from where you're sitting, you don't see anything around you for a kilometer. So if you're on, if you're in a park, all you'd see for a kilometer would be a park. If you're on the 3rd floor of a building, you'd not see any roads or trees. You'd just see a 3rd floor of a building for a kilometer. So it's really poor resolution. But around Florida, about 6% has been mapped to a 10 meter by 10 meter resolution. So that's a really, much higher resolution. So only 6% though of.
And who did that?
I think it's been over time. I know you know, people, for example, from the University of South Florida College of Marine Science have been doing this, but it's slowly building up. And actually just recently they announced funding from NOAA to set up a center for ocean mapping and innovative technologies. So I think there's going to be a real focus on getting a map around Florida.
And why do we want a map?
Very good question as well. So most of the world's oceans, by the way, have not been mapped. The seafloor has not been mapped. Something like only 19% has been mapped to 100-meter resolution. So most of it we still don't know. So why do we need a map? Well, we need to know the bathymetry for things like tsunami forecasting.
What's the bathymetry?
The bathymetry is the lay of the seafloor, so to speak, the topography. We call it on land topography, and underwater it's bathymetry. So it's really just the map. So the map of the seafloor we need for things like tsunami forecasting, for knowing where there are things like biological hotspots and diversity, for knowing how the currents are flowing in a finer resolution, finer scale. So yeah, there's many reasons, but to me, a map of our own planet, this is our home, right? A map is a fundamental piece of understanding who you are and where you are in the universe and things around you. And once you have that understanding, you start to value something. And once you value it, you start to care for it and make it healthy. So to me, a map is that fundamental building block to understanding the ocean.
So we go back, excuse me, Carol, we go back to the space exploration. We're much more fascinated with a seemingly dead planet like Mars than we are with the abundant life and intimacy of our own planet. Yeah.
And part of that's driven by how difficult it is to just see what's down there versus seeing what's
I do have a question about that. I mean, I've seen movies where you have submarines, atomic submarines, going through canyons, and they're using their sonar, and they're sort of mapping. They know what's coming and stuff like that. Do they know what's coming, or does the sonar just sort of give them an at the moment? You're going to run into a seamount in a minute, but they know something about some of the deep trenches. You know, I've seen Hunt for Red October. I don't know, Carol, every time she sees me watching it.
Like every night.
You know, and
what are you watching? It's either Red October or Harry Potter.
Oh, good choice.
This deep cavern in the middle of the ocean somewhere. And, you know, it shows all this sort of topographical stuff. So they're discovering that in real time. They don't really have a hardbound map of that area. They just know it's there. They know it's a trench. I think they call it some kind of trench. They know it's there, and they can maneuver in it within 2 meters. I mean, that's Hollywood, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. It's so Hollywood is slightly different from reality. So a few years ago, I don't remember the name of the submarine, but there was one that hit a seamount because it didn't know it was there, and it caused some damage. Another classic example now is, you know, the Malaysian airline that went down in 2012. During the search for that, which was quite extensive, they didn't find, of course, the airline, or they haven't found it yet, but they did find 2 new volcanoes, one of which is bigger than Mount Vesuvius. And they also, the map, and I put this in, you know, little air quotes, they were using was off by something like 1,000 feet in one place at least. So that really highlighted how poorly we know our own planet. We're finding volcanoes that we've never seen before.
So is there any technology that can record what that at the moment sonar is seeing and saying, you know, GPS it and Google it and say, this is here, right here? Is there a system for that? Is that a technological possibility to gather information?
Yes, that Actually, that is coming and that is on its way. So that was part of the push for the Ocean Discovery X Prize. Before that point, people would go out with their technology, they'd map, and then it would take 2 to 3 weeks to actually bring the map to fruition and clean up the data. We pushed for mapping, returning the maps within, I think it was within 48 hours. So we were pushing for real time, basically. And actually, as we went around Australia, they now have that capability. So as Falco was mapping, there's a site called Seabed. It was being transmitted onto that and shown, and you could see, kind of real time. But there's a global effort now underway called Seabed 2030, which is to map the seafloor, the entire seafloor, by 2030. And in 2015, when I launched that Ocean Discovery X Prize, the estimate was it would take 200 to 600 years to achieve that.
Wow.
So just in the last 5 years, we've really pushed on technology to the point where we're now looking at a decade or less.
Well, there's some high school students out there that are ready to tackle this, right?
Yes. Yes, we had one of the winning teams was a group of high school and junior high students who won was a bonus prize from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to develop technology to track a chemical or biological signal underwater with no human intervention. And so they came in first place, and it shows that, innovation and invention can come from anywhere at any age. You just need that idea, that spark.
That's such a great and reassuring story.
It's a very reassuring story, because one of the things that happens at our exhibit is people talk about climate change and what can you do? And most people are fairly discouraged that, we are ever going to be able to meet the challenge. And, this is why talking to you and hearing about the X Prizes and what you're doing with this research now with the Schmidt Ocean Institute, and while it's relevant to everybody around the world, and especially Florida, because we're so impacted by water and the oceans, is that there is such innovation. And if we engage people around the world and we allow open discussion and sharing of findings, that, we are really brilliant human beings. And I am convinced that we will find a way, and probably something no one's thought of yet. And, to hear high school and junior high age people are engaging in this, well, they don't think within the box. They've got, they think within all the oceans. It's really remarkable, and it gives me such hope, and it's really a joyful thing.
I agree. It's fantastic to see the ideas that they had and they continue to have. And you're right, it's because they've not, been trained in the same way that, and their imagination is fantastic. And why not try something?
Yeah.
I think the other place where, we get inspiration, and this is going back to the point about space and oceans, is actually from Hollywood and from the movies. So one of the things that I've been looking at is how do we communicate about space versus the ocean, and what's the impact of that? And one of them is, showing in science fiction stories, future technology gives inspiration to the young engineers that can be made. We don't have as many science fiction ocean movies as we do science fiction space movies. So that's one difference that, it'd be nice to try and equalize.
But it's dark down there.
And that's one of the reasons we don't have so many of them. You're absolutely right.
I think it's dark out in space too, though, isn't it?
True.
So I have a sort of bizarre question back to mapping.
Okay.
And you can see maps. Both Robin and I are really into maps. And I love having a map in my hand when I drive and all of that. Now, do the creatures in the sea have anything like a map? Or is that just a human construct? I mean, they use, some of them use sonar, but they do travel, along. And, I'm thinking there's something like akin to a map.
Well, they go back to the same place quite often, across the ocean. Across the ocean, yes.
I was going to say, see, little turtles are born, they leave for 30 years, and then they come back to Florida. So they don't have it in the same visual way that we do, but they have other senses. So we already mentioned temperature and salinity, but there's sound, like you said. So there are other things. There might be chemicals we've not yet identified pathways for, that they're actually following. But this goes back to that, aliens concept of not only have we not found and seen everything on this planet, but we don't even know how they fully sense and operate and get around yet. So what's not to say that on other planets there are other creatures, very, very small perhaps, who travel in different ways. And it's only relatively recently, like in the last 50 years, that we knew of hydrothermal vents. So until the 1970s, we thought everything was a carbon-based life form and needed carbon to survive in some shape or form. And these hydrothermal vents, the sulfur dioxide, it's very high temperature, it's no oxygen, and they thrive in communities.
So they could live on Venus or someplace like that. I mean, there could be that kind of life there. That's not what we think of as life.
So I want to get back to this idea of maps. I mean, we think of mapping the seafloor, but maybe there's other things we need to map, like mapping a certain chemical throughout the oceans, or mapping temperatures, or salinity. That we do have a sense of mapping terrain. That's sort of when we think of a map, we think of terrain. But there's all sorts of other ways. I mean, mapping smells.
It's a three-dimensional map of the ocean that we really are looking for. And that's partly why we had that bonus prize for technology that could detect a chemical or biological signal and track it to the source, because it's certainly not a two-dimensional problem that, but we don't really have great tools to track like that yet. But we're getting there, because there are a group of youngsters who push that.
So this big ocean research vessel that you have, and now you have two, can that, for example, go in the Gulf of Mexico?
Yes, it has actually been in the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, it has?
Yeah, the Falco, I believe back in 2012 or 13, sometime back then, it was in the Gulf of Mexico. It actually docked at St. Petersburg.
We probably saw it because we used to live right there.
Yes, we have seen it.
We have seen it. Yeah, we have seen
it. Yeah. So it can go, it can.
Do you know what it was doing in the Gulf of Mexico?
Oh, this was before I joined. I mean, I was in St. Petersburg and I saw it, but I don't recall what they were doing. But the new vessel. So we've got Falco. We just 2 weeks ago announced, or maybe it was even last week announced, we purchased a new vessel, Falco 2, to continue the never-ending story. It's we will continue this. And
can we see a picture of it?
Yes, I think there is a photograph of it somewhere. And
the new vessel.
Yeah. There it is. Yeah. So this is, of course, before we bought it, but this is a much larger vessel. So Falco, and I think there's a graphic that shows, you know, an attempt at a
Comparison
as well, graphic. But Falco, the original, the classic, is about 272 feet in length, and the new one is 363 feet in length. So quite considerably bigger. And it has a much larger, as you can see in this image, aft deck space, which allows us to do whole host of new and different scientific, you know, science, and allow different scientific capabilities on board. But it also has the ability to go through 10 to 15 centimeters of ice, which Falco Classic doesn't. So this now expands our geographical range globally as well.
So I wanted to ask too, they have to be incredibly seaworthy vessels, don't they? They're very, they look very stout and you know, high freeboard or whatever you call it. And,
very, very stable. Falco too.
Yeah, I bet they encounter some pretty nasty stuff sometimes.
The weather, it's not easy. It's not easy being at sea sometimes. But Falco 2 actually has what's called, it's got 2 of these moon pools, which is a lovely name. But it's for inside the vessel itself and on the deck, and inside the hangar is one moon pool, and it opens to the water. So it's inside. So in rough weather, you can still carry on and deploy instruments down the center of the ship and into the water. And you don't have to worry about the, you know, what's going on outside.
20-foot breaking seas.
Right. Yeah. So because you're connected to the water, right? So it's just a straight, stable down.
So if there are scientists watching this, how would they get to be on your vessel?
We actually invite proposals. At the moment, we're in a transition from one to the next. So we're really not going to be inviting until starting next year. And we will release where we're going to be, like, you know, going back to the maps in the Atlantic or in the Mediterranean or wherever we're going to be. And we will get that word out through our social media. So we're on Twitter and Facebook, and so, you know, we'll put the word out that we're seeking proposals from scientists.
So one of the things around Florida that we see, especially in the Gulf, is oil. You know, searching for oil and finding it, hence the oil spill. Is that the case all around the world? Is there oil under all of the seafloor, or is there oil only in certain places? I mean, I know that oils form from vegetation and small animals and things that have been fermenting for, you know, millions of years. But is it all around the world?
I don't think it's all around the world. I think it's in certain places. Obviously, some places are on land, some are in the ocean. I think the Gulf of Mexico is the 3rd largest oil reserve on the planet, though. And so, there's I think, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of natural oil seeps in the Gulf of Mexico. And with those seeps has come
could you explain that, what a seep is?
Yeah, it's just basic little in the seafloor, little fissures that allow oil to just, you know, come up into, you know, into the ocean environment.
I never knew that.
Yeah, there's a lot in the Gulf of Mexico. It's kind of a leaky sieve in some ways, but the Gulf of Mexico, because of these, the natural ecosystem requires this oil now. So there are bacteria and etc. that depend. This is part of their chemical makeup. And
do they eat it?
Yeah, there is bacteria that can eat the oil. Yeah,
and plants grow in it, and
I think so, but I'm not an expert on this. So you might have to have some other scientist who's an expert come on.
Yeah. So, but doesn't oil affect the waters? And
yeah, but that's part of what they've grown up with for, you know, hundreds of generations of their own creature lives. So they've evolved to adapt to it.
So the concern we all have, of course, is that the waters are warming, and how it affects us. And the oceans absorb so much carbon dioxide to help us, but they're sort of oversaturated. And so I'm asking you because you're just smart and you've been involved with this. Are there solutions that your scientists are looking at, or is this a priority for the Schmidt Ocean Institute?
And there are actually yes to both questions, I think, there. So as far as carbon dioxide, scientists and engineers are looking at this. So I'm just going to pop back to X Prize for a minute. There is actually a Carbonx Prize that's underway to take CO2 from, to build technology to take carbon dioxide from the flume of power plants, because you know those are the biggest source, point source polluters, and to transfer it into something that's of economic value. So for example, taking the CO2 and making cement, or in fact there is vodka now that is made from carbon dioxide from you know, that's otherwise polluting and being thrown away. And the idea behind the economic component to that is to show the point source polluters that they're throwing money away, and to stop, you know. So I think there's a lot, to me, I am an optimistic person. What's great is this focus on this problem and the global awareness that has come about even in the last 10 years is huge. In the ocean, I think, though, the bigger problem is going to be temperature. So let's separate carbon dioxide from temperature rise for a moment, because even if we stopped CO2 emissions today, the Earth has enough, the atmosphere ocean system, enough inertia, the temperature will continue to rise for a few more decades. So the issue is, how do we buy ourselves time to clean up the atmosphere and keep the temperature the same or keep it cool? So there are a lot of conversations now going on that topic separately from the CO2 topic, which is where I think we really need to quickly do something. So there are a number of possible solutions. One is to simulate volcanic eruptions. So when a volcano erupts, historically it cools the planet, it keeps temperature low, and that's a natural process. So that's one, is can we artificially, you know, simulate something like that?
Doesn't CO2 come out from a volcano?
No, it's the sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere that keeps it, it's kind of shades it, right? Another one is to what's called cloud brightening. So to create clouds, because, you know, when you have a cloudy day, it's cooler than when the sun shines. Another one that I kind of, being on the more tech engineering end of the spectrum, is, can we build like a solar parasol for the Earth that we put far away enough from the outside of our atmosphere, so we're not messing with our atmosphere anymore, and we just shade the sun just a little to keep us cool. But all these things are going on. And then as far as the Schmidt Ocean Institute goes, I think, you know, we would be happy to support any testing of any technology that mitigates climate impacts. So for example, I know recently that over corals, they're trying to cool by cooling corals by putting a shade over coral. So anything like that, we'd be happy to, going forward, include that in
We have some ice cube trays.
Perfect. I think We just need a couple of those. We'll be great.
And
With
it's
our-
like
with
on
our drinks.
land, what we do is we plant trees
Yeah.
and we create shade.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the things that's happened with the new Biden administration is we've seen that we have John Kerry in there as the climate czar. So we have some attention to government, federal government, looking at this issue and I guess hoping to create legislation and provide funding and so on. And the Schmidt Ocean Institute is a private, funded privately by a very generous husband and wife team. I mean, it's really incredible. So how does the government partner in all of this? And what would you, as an executive director who's well aware of this, how would you, what would you tell them to do?
Oh my God, this is being recorded now. So yeah, we are philanthropically funded and we're very fortunate in that respect. And what that allows us to do is react quickly and take risks that governments may not be willing or able to take. And we're also not driven by profit. So we can do things, that businesses may not support either. Right. So I think there is room for all. There is so much scope, so much to do in the ocean arena yet. There is definitely room for government funding as well as industry funding, as well as private, philanthropic funding as we have. I think for us, we bring to the table this amazing asset, this resource of a vessel, and it is expensive to go to sea, which is why this was set up to try and provide a floating laboratory. It's got high performance computing, it's got sensors and technologies on board for scientists to use. But we ask scientists to get grants to fund their way for travel, for doing their research. So, complementary to what we provide. So I think there's room for intersection across the board for these things. I don't know if I answered all your questions, but one thing that actually, before I forget, that struck me when you said, on land we plant trees. So that's a nature-based solution to address climate, right? In the ocean, mangroves, seagrasses, planting of those, restoring coastal ecosystems, all of those are really important in order to maintain the health of the ecosystem and to maintain our coastline and those who live along the coast.
Here in Florida, they're finding that there's a larger group of manatee deaths on the east coast of Florida, and part of it is the algae has killed the seabed floors, and the manatee are being starved, and that their autopsies are showing that they're just not being able to eat because the seagrass is disappearing because of the algae flow that is something that we have created.
Wow.
So and the warm waters help to...
I recall when in Tampa Bay, actually, there was a scallop die-off. And I remember being part of the seagrass planting, voluntary effort in Tampa Bay. And I think that actually led to it self-cleaning, a cleaning of the bay.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know if that's...
That and oysters.
And the oysters, it brought back the oysters and it brought, so there are nature-based solutions that... so for you were saying, what can governments help support? That has such an amazing return on investment, essentially, if you could have programs like that, because nature heals itself.
Yes, it does.
So once you put that first investment in, and you just sit back and let it do that, and it's great.
So we actually have to stop.
Oh no.
I know. But the thing is that we talk about the future, and you certainly are part of that, and the research vessels, and the scientists, and the artists, and the dancers, and the journalists, and theater people, and we all have our own responsibility to live in this world in a healthy, responsible way. And so, do you have any final words that you would like to offer, given your range of experience, about how we can be really good stewards for our planet?
That's a very, very, very good question. And I think a lot of people probably who are watching this already know, to just be mindful of what resources you're using, where you throw rubbish away, all of the things that you've all probably heard many, many times. But also I would actually encourage everyone to listen and learn and understand the ocean. And if it's any help on that front, our ROV Sebastian, which is that robot I mentioned a while ago, we actually broadcast live underwater footage when it's down there, on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, and again, we advertise that. But you learn, and even I have learned alongside the scientists who are narrating on those, and you can hear, even listening to them talking about things, and best thing is when they say, wow, what's that? Because even they don't know quite often, like there's a lot that's yet to be found. And so just take an interest and learn about the ocean, and not just the ocean. I think it's the whole ecosystem, the land, the atmosphere, the ocean. It's until we actually get to Mars, this is our home. So we should vacuum it every once in a while.
Well, thank you, Robert Stackhouse. Thank you, wonderful Jyotika Vermani. Thank you, the Volo Foundation, for making this possible. And thank you, Danny Oldo. Are you going to come back up with us? There you are, who's been making all of us look good.
Yes, thank you a lot. I wanted to thank you, Carol and Robert, as usual, for hosting these events. It's always a fascinating conversation. And of course, Jyotika as well for joining us. It was fascinating being in the background and listening. I'd also like to take a second to thank the Volo Foundation, and that it's been a pleasure being a part of Florida Climate Week, which is really exciting, first time for us at Creative Pinellas. So we're happy about that also. So thanks to everybody that watched the video, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. For more information on all the programming and resources from Creative Pinellas, visit creativepinellas.org.